of the newly branded podcast, Build a Better Business. Extension, I am so excited to have you here with me today, Jen. And you guys are in for a treat because all of us speak, whether it's to a small group, whether it's to family, whether it's on a stage, we all speak. And many are afraid of speaking. There's a fear of speaking or don't feel like you do it very well. Jen is going to help us walk through how we can actually speak powerfully and fearlessly today. So, Jen, please introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what you do.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you, Kanisha, for having me on your newly branded podcast. Super excited for that. My name is Jen, and this is streaming to my profiles as well. So if you're already connected to me, you know who I am, but I'm an ICF certified speaker coach who retired from health coaching, but I've built my entire business named Weightless from presenting on stages. And I started with my own transformational story, which is how I lost 100 pounds in 1 year with no products or programs or supplements. So that is how I built my business. And today I help other service-based businesses also grow their impact and income on stage or behind a microphone.
So I'm going to dive right in there because first, I know people are always wondering, especially those who do want to speak on stages. Jen, so you built your coaching business from speaking about your transformation. First of all, congratulations. Second of
Thank
all,
you.
losing the weight without being on a program, following somebody else, that takes a lot of discipline. And so kudos to you for that. Then you started telling people your story. How did you how did you navigate the waters to find stages for you to speak on?
Well, let's back up a little bit because when I was a kid, I was really good at hiding in plain sight because I was morbidly obese at a time in the 80s when no children were morbidly obese. And morbidly just means 100 pounds over my recommended weight. So I was bullied frequently and I got really good at hiding and hiding my tears when I was bullied on the playground. So the last thing I ever wanted to do was be in the spotlight. And a lot of my clients could resonate with this because they also don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight. So the seed of the idea for Weightless came when I was in Toastmasters. Big shout out to Toastmasters. I love Toastmasters International. But if you've ever been a part of Toastmasters, you know that you're required to produce your own content and you have to deliver that content in a 5 to 7 minute speech. So I've been in Toastmasters for a while, won some speech contests, participated at my local group, and I ran out of content. And I'm like, well, what do I talk about now? And I'm like, well, maybe I should talk about how I used to be morbidly obese because by the time I was in this Toastmasters group, I had already lost the weight, which was about 100 pounds. So nobody in Minnesota, which is where I live right now, knew that I used to be heavier than I was because I grew up in Wisconsin. So I'm like, oh, should I? Shouldn't I? I was scared a little bit. I'm like, who cares about this story of mine? And by the time I finished the presentation, the person I admired the most, my mentor in Toastmasters, came up to me and she said, well, Jen, that was so powerful that I want to change my lifestyle. I've been struggling with my health, I've been struggling with how I feel in my body. And you just inspired me to do something differently. And so that was the idea for Weightless. I'm like, okay, this is a message that people want to hear, but more than that, if that's what I could accomplish in 7 minutes of presenting, what if I had 30 minutes or 60 minutes? How many lives would be impacted through just sharing a simple story?
Yeah, and you shared this in your Toastmasters
I did.
meeting. This was one of your Toastmaster present speeches that are given during a Toastmaster meeting. So then how did you go from understanding, okay, this is a message that can impact people's lives, from doing it in a safe, I say safe group because you knew them, but still speaking, you still may have gotten a little nervous, I don't know. But from that area, that group, to your first stage where you're not in that group, where you're talking to a group of people that you don't know, how did you find that opportunity? What was that opportunity?
Oh, by the way, I still get nervous today. So I've been speaking for over 15 years. I get paid to speak most of the time. I do offer sometimes free presentations. I still get nervous because regardless of what my message is always the same because I have a signature speech,
Mhm.
but my audience is always different. The people in my audience are always different. The people in my audience always have slightly different versions of similar struggles of previous audiences I've presented to. So I'm always nervous, even today. Like if you stop being nervous, it's probably a sign that you're not as close to your content, you're not as passionate about your content. So I do want to throw that out there. How did I get to that first stage? Well, when I opened my company waitlist, I knew that I was going to be a professional speaker. And luckily, I had friends in National Speakers Association. I had a mentor, Vitalia Bryn Pundik, who taught me the business side of a speaking business because a lot of people speak, but not a lot of people make it an income gathering method for their business. So I knew I wanted it to be an income gathering method for my business. So I'm like, okay, I opened up this company. Now, how do I find those audiences? And if you're someone who's speaking right now and you're like, I've done these things, I'm excited to do more stages, how do I find the next stage? Well, part of the way in which I work with people is helping you be consistently on stage. And I believe that there's a stage for everyone. So for me personally, I was looking for stages of women who wanted to improve their health. And so one of the first groups that I presented to, and I continued to present to for years and years and years, was called TOPS, which is Taking Off Pounds Sensibly. So it's a nonprofit weight loss support group, and it trends towards people who are, 60, 70, 80. So an older demographic of people. I was able to get connected with their regional representative. I was able to present to them. But my first paid speaking opportunity was so exciting because I had a mentor within National Speakers Association. And I was really bold and courageous. And I said, hey, Janelle, can you help me? I noticed one of these clients of yours might be a good fit for me. Would you be willing to do a warm introduction for me to your organizer? And she's like, well, sure. Let me do that. So that was my very first paid speaking engagement. So when you're looking for your next stage, you can lurk on where other people have spoken before, especially people who have spoken on your topic, and identify whether that could be a good fit audience for you. And if you're bold, reach out to them. You may have people in your network today who are speaking and do have connections within those places. And it's all about your connections when it comes to speaking.
So what I'm hearing is if you know people who are currently speaking, they've done speaking engagements. They may not be a professional speaker, but they've done speaking engagements for whatever reason. And their audience is an audience that you want to be a part of. Ask them if they would introduce you to the organizer of the place where they spoke. Is that what I'm getting?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Now, you had Toastmasters under your belt. You've been part of Toastmasters, Jenn. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, it's okay to still get nervous when you speak. You may not be as close to your content if you're not. That's a good takeaway. At the same time, there's a difference between being nervous and having fears of speaking, and that may play into it. But you help people with speaking publicly, presenting well. And part of what I talk about in my speaking is how do we move through the fears that hold the future hostage that we actually want, right? I want to be on stage. That's the future I want, but my fear is holding me from actually taking the steps to get me to speak on a stage. So I'm curious, what are some of the fears that you come across with your clients? And we'll just start with one that comes to mind for you that is pretty prevalent. Tell me what it is, and then let's talk about how do you help your clients to move through it?
Mm. Well, at the end of the day, I think the biggest fear that many of my clients have is how do I add value as a speaker in general?
Mhm.
And this is a really hard question to answer because it depends, right? Like there are certain audiences that need certain things from you. And I think it's really hard for many entrepreneurs to distill all of the knowledge and expertise and education they've gathered over the years and their own personal transformation, their client case studies. It's really hard to distill that down to a 60-minute presentation, right? It feels like an impossible task. And so people tend to just stuff all of this information there. And the fear is If they don't share everything they know, like everything in the kitchen sink, then they're going to not add enough value to that audience. But I think the opposite is true. The more you edit your content and make it repeatable, tangible, and engaging for your audience, the more likely your audience is going to love your message. So it's not about the information. We don't need to transfer information from one head to the other. Nobody wants to be a talking head on stage. That's so aggravating and annoying for your audiences. So, what is one way you can get your audience to put their arms around what you're talking about and lean into that? Not enough speakers are doing that. Instead, they're focusing on their slides and they're focusing on their script and they're focusing on these outer trappings of being a good speaker. But at the end of the day, speaking is about creating a conversation. So if you're the only one speaking in that conversation, it's not really a conversation, right? It's
Yeah.
one-sided, and it's not what you need as a speaker. So to embrace that fear a little bit, understand that the more simple your concept is, the easier it will be for your audience to love it, and by consequence, love you as well.
So when I hear you talk about focusing on having a conversation as you're speaking, that's not typically something that people hear or think about when it comes to presenting. We think, I do have information to transfer. Hopefully, I can do it in a way that's engaging and you're going to be interested because I presented with all of the right movements and the right tone of voice and I hit the points exactly when I'm supposed to, and that will make it memorable. But you're saying it's a conversation, which is a two-way exchange. Can you unpack that so that we get a little bit better understanding of what the conversation is that we're invoking that we can, and the responses that we can look for from our from the people that we're talking to, so that we understand how that conversation is supposed to actually happen?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So, how do you have a conversation when you're the one standing on stage presenting something and your audience may or may not be able to give you feedback? So, to that, I would say your audience can always give you feedback, and the more opportunities you give them to do that, the more it's a conversation. So, let's imagine you're on a keynote stage. Suppose there's 500 people in the audience in front of you. You can't ask every individual in that audience like to respond to a question because you just don't have enough time for that. What you can do is ask rhetorical questions such as raise your hand if this applies to you, get up on your feet if this is something that you've ever struggled with. And there are touch points within your speech where you can engage your audience, even if it's a simple yes or no or a nod or something that they can get into their body and respond and engage with your content. So it's not always about asking a question and having people respond, especially with the larger audiences, because you may not be able to do that. Instead, it's being able to take the feedback from your audience, whether it's them scrolling their phone while you're talking. There are different techniques you can use to get them engaged again with your content. If you notice them pulling out their phones and multitasking, there are different techniques you can do to create energy. There's a different way you can structure your speech format so that by the time you leave that stage, people are already standing and clapping for you. It's all in how you structure the information, and it's all in how you pause and let your audience catch up with what you just shared.
I like that pause. I've heard that before because I've been to speaker trainings as a speaker, and silence is powerful. You have to get very comfortable with that. And it is, it's only a pause, but it is part of, like you said, the conversation, because typically when people have a conversation, unless you have a tendency to be a monologuer, which, we have those in the world, most people in a conversation stop, pause, continue, so that exactly what you said, whether we do it consciously or subconsciously, people have a chance to process what did they just say? Because to your point earlier, you want it to be memorable. And with what you're talking about with conversation, I think about one thing I talk about, Jen, is fear goes away when we focus on the other person. Fear
Mm,
comes in when we're self-focused. The fear is, how is this going to affect me? How am I going to look? What if I don't sound right? What if I mess up? No, all of the pronouns in there are self-directed inward, right? But when we focus on the other person we're talking with, whether it's a group of 100, 1,000, or one, when that focus is outward, there's not that fear, if it doesn't completely go away, it drastically reduces, because you're more concerned about how are they feeling? How are they receiving this? Are they understanding? Am I understanding what they need? And am I making sure that they're feeling heard? And then you're not thinking about yourself. So the fear goes away. So that piece about the conversation really resonates, because, again, it's outward focused versus how do I look? How do I feel? How do I sound? Is it good enough?
Oh, so true, so true. And you will always rise to the level of your preparation. So if you didn't rehearse, you don't know your content very well, you will not be able to engage with your audience to the level that they probably want to engage with you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When it comes to practice, so as you just talked about, knowing your speech, we hear memorize your speech, but I don't typically
No.
hear that from coaches who help with public speaking. You emphatically shook your head. And I think people do that because they want to feel prepared. They want to feel like I know everything. And so that will help to alleviate this fear. But then you get into what if I forget? And so it generates other fears. So, how do you encourage people to prepare, Jenn, to provide a speech that's powerful?
Well, first of all, I have a free resource that helps you kind of wrap your hands around this. Even if you've done presentations before, it's important to look at structures that work for your audience. So the signature speech template is a free resource that I offer. I will post that link in the comments and below this video here. But what you need to know is having touch points with your audience is the way to keep them with you and to make sure that you don't forget your content. By the way, you will forget something in your content. I guarantee it. Every stage I've ever been on, I've forgotten something that I thought was key just before that day. And sometimes you're going to throw things out the morning of or the day of, just before you deliver your presentation, because you've done your research on your audience and you know that that doesn't apply. So it's okay to customize your topic and your content to who's in that room, but you won't be able to do that until after you've had multiple conversations with the event organizer to understand more about your audience. So there are things you can do. You can have a speech that is ready to go, that has consistent audience takeaways. If you don't already have that, that's what the signature speech is. Once you know what those consistent audience takeaways are, then you can do the research to customize that particular content to that specific audience. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about what that means. If I'm speaking to a corporate audience, I might reference certain reports or certain like company resources that are available to them that can help them take the learning and go deeper with it. I wouldn't necessarily do that for my women's entrepreneurial groups because they have different access to different things and their needs are different. So that's how you customize some of your content. But I can still talk about, for example, presentation techniques. I just change some of the stories and examples and ways that you can do that based on what resources people have available to them within that audience.
That's a great example. Give me an example of your signature speech. What are the takeaways, audience takeaways, that you have in your signature speech so that people can get a more concrete, tangible feeling of what that looks like?
Yeah, and you can also see this information on my speaking page on my website, waitlistchronicles.com. But my main signature speech is growing your coaching business through public speaking. So what I talk about is how to sell from the stage without annoying your audience, how to structure a signature speech so that people remember you and ask to have you come back to their stage. And another one is how public speaking can grow your impact and income even if you've never done it before. So those are the main audience takeaways I have. And I sometimes customize those depending on which group I'm speaking to.
So those are your three titles, or those are the three takeaways within one speech?
3 takeaways within one speech.
Oh, wow. Those sound very big. So then I'm assuming, if I'm understanding what you're sharing as far as audience takeaways, it's the three, in this case, 3 points, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so how, if you've never spoken before, you can speak with impact and make income. And then there's sub points underneath that, as far as, are these actual tactics people can take, or is it more of an inspiration when it comes from your signature speech?
Well, it depends on how much time I have for this presentation. So if it's a keynote speech, I'm probably delivering it in 45 to 60 minutes, which I don't go too deep into the how. And that's one thing that is distinguishes a keynote presentation from a breakout presentation. So a breakout presentation, consider an annual conference where there's 50 different breakout sessions. They're 50 to 60 minutes each, or up to 90 minutes. You have more time to go hands-on with your audience in that room because it's usually a smaller, more intimate audience. You probably will be providing handouts. You probably will be doing interactive breakout activities that people can really do the how more than you could as a keynote speaker. As a keynote speaker, you're answering why. You're not answering how, because you don't have enough time to go into the how. So that's why it's important when you're looking at your speaking program, it's not just one speech. It's one speech that you can deliver in multiple formats. And that's what makes it a program, because people who understand the why from your keynote might want to look into the how next. So if they want to take it a little bit deeper, you'll have an opportunity for them to do that should they choose to take that path.
Makes sense. I want to get a little deeper, Jenn, into the fears again that come along with speaking. So we talked about one, but I'm curious from a personal standpoint. You still get a little nervous, as you said. I don't know if you still have any fears now, but either now or previously when you began speaking outside of Toastmasters, tell me about one of those fears that you had to address or may still be addressing when it comes to your speaking career.
Oh, all of the worst things that you can think of, right? What if I get up on stage and I fall off, or I'm walking up on the stairs and I trip or I'm wearing new shoes and I stumble or something like that? What if my technology fails? What if I don't get to the venue on time because I had an appointment just before and I can't get there and there's traffic and all of the things? I mean, I've presented internationally as well. So what if I get the wrong time zone? What if I show up too early, too late? What if technology, like I've had presentations where literally I got kicked out when the host exited for a brief minute. I've had all of those things happen. And I've known some speakers who have wardrobe malfunctions on stage. Luckily, I've never had that happen. But it can happen. That's why when you rehearse, you wear the outfit you're going to be speaking in so that you don't have those things show up last minute. But everything, right? Like not wearing the right clothing for a mic pack, which you may not think about. But if you're a woman who likes to wear dresses when you're on stage and you have a wireless lavalier, you need to attach the mic pack to something. So if you're not wearing a belt, you might have to put it in your bra, so those are some things that you may not have considered. All the fears that come up. And then of course the content related fears, right? What if I forget something? What if nobody responds when I ask a question and I'm engaging with them? What if in Q&A someone heckles me or harasses me? I mean, that can happen. It hasn't happened very often to me, but all of those things. I've looked up into my audience and I've had people cry, even though it's never happened before in that particular speech. I looked up in my front row and somebody was crying and I didn't really know what to do at the moment. Do I address her? I don't want to embarrass her. So I paused, I let it sit for a bit and I continue with my content and then checked in with her afterwards. But literally anything that could happen has happened and will continue to happen. So part of what makes you conquer that fear is experiencing it. You won't know until you're in the situation whether you can handle it. And I will say you will have 100% success rate with surviving anything that comes up on stage or even before the stage. You are a survivor, you will get through it, and your audience will probably connect with you on a different level based on some of those horrible things that potentially could happen when you're on stage.
I love that you will have 100% survival rate. As long as you're still breathing, we all have 100% survival rate. So take confidence out of that for sure. You mentioned a ton of things that bring up fear, bring up anxiety whenever speaking, whenever doing anything. What is your go-to for, or what's your mindset maybe for getting through them? You got to experience it. You have experienced it, but they still come up. So how do you mentally move through that fear so that you continue to perform?
Well, I've gotten really good over the years at turning the fear into excitement. So fear and excitement show up similarly in your bodies, right? If you're a person who gets very nervous, your heart is racing, maybe you get sweaty, maybe you speak faster. I'm a fast talker. So when I'm really nervous, you can tell because I go a million miles a minute. So there are different rituals you can do based on how nerves show up for you. So for me, I want to slow myself down because I'm too fast when I'm nervous. So for me, that would mean grounding techniques. And this is part of pre-speaking rituals that my clients and I work through. But for me, I need grounding. So that could be, going to the bathroom, taking some deep breaths. It could mean walking outside. It could mean just looking at the sun if I can step outside for a moment or two. That grounds me. It could be saying mantras to myself, like I say exactly what the audience needs to hear, or talking to myself on the drive over to a speaking engagement. These are all things that help ground me into my purpose and my passion. But you might be a person who slows down when you're on stage, and that's how your nerves show up. So for you, you might want to energize yourself through some sort of activity, like that gets your blood flowing, that gets your heart going. It just depends on how nerves show up for you.
When you say that, I think about I speak slower sometimes, and I don't know if it's nerves or if it's a concern that I want to make sure people hear me, but it's not necessarily the typical tempo at which I speak. And I even noticed
Mm,
myself doing it on the podcast. So it's interesting that you brought that up because now I need to reflect a little bit. But then also, I was thinking about I also have learned in life, I learned early in life, that if I get too excited about something, it does not go well. I'll give you
mm.
a 30-second story. I played basketball all the way through college, thank God. But in high school, I was going to an AAU game. For those listening now, it's called travel ball. It used to be called AAU. I don't know why they changed it. Whatever. And I was riding with one of my teammates, and the music, Jenn, was super exciting. I was pumped. When I tell you I got to the gym and could not buy a basket the first half, I realized then excited is not how you need to be. You need to be chill and calm before performing, right? And after halftime and my coach yelling, things got better. But I think it's very important that we reflect, to your point, and understand, how do we shift, what changes when we get nervous, and then how do we counteract that? And so thank you for saying that about the slowing down, because now I recognize, okay, there's something there that I need to change. Okay,
You're welcome.
we're coming up on time. I want to ask a couple more questions before I have you tell everybody how they can find you and connect with you and learn more. So part of this presentation is also our conversation was how do you present powerfully? And you've talked about some great ways to be aware of what you're doing, some great ways to connect with the audience. But I want to know from you, give us one other technique that we can take away and say, okay, I can start to practice this so that I feel more powerful, I feel more confident when I'm speaking, when I'm presenting.
It has to do with rehearsal. So before you ever get on the stage where you're facing the audience and they're facing you, one of the best ways you can rehearse is listen to yourself. And this is torture for some of us. I hate listening to myself. Maybe you're in the same boat with me, but listen to your audio and what you're listening for on your audio. Just record yourself on your phone, on voice memos, or any app you want to use. Record yourself speaking, doing your presentation, and listen for what stands out, because that's what your audience is hearing as well. So removing the visual elements from it, you can do that as a second stage of your rehearsal process. But the first stage is listening to the audio. Are you using the right word choice? What does your pacing sound like? Does it make sense? Do you create excitement through modulation or through different ways that you're speaking, or the rhythm in which you're speaking? Speaking is kind of like a dance, but you're creating the music. So how can you make that a more fun overture instead of just having it be a steady state baseline in the background. You want to create interest through your vocal variety. So that's the number one tip, is understanding how to use your voice better. What does your breath sound like? Do you have good breath control? If you don't, an exercise practice will help you. And understand how to pace yourself and how to create that music through your words.
You have some amazing tips. I know that you also were going to share with us some of the resources that will help to improve and prepare for that speaking. The thing that I'm taking away is, as you mentioned, you have a signature speech. And I think that's something that some people know, but some people don't. If you want to get into speaking, have a signature speech, and then you can practice that over and over and over. And the rehearsal, I heard at least 2 different rehearsals in there
Yes.
outside of just reading your speech over and over, is 1, to do it audio without the visual, and then 2, to do a visual. So that's at least 2 rehearsals before, in addition to anything else. And so a lot of practice. You say these things with a natural ease as though you know them well. Jenn, do you know how many speeches you've given over the years
Oh my
outside of
gosh, I
Toastmasters?
probably should keep count, right? I have
Yeah.
no I have no idea. But I will say that over the past 4 years, I present at least 3 to 5 times per month. So if you add those up, I'm not a mathematician, but yeah, that's kind of a high number.
That is a high number. Okay, I can't leave without asking. That seems like a lot. Are these repeat organizations that you're going back to? Are these companies? Are these new opportunities? That seems like a lot. I'm sure people are hearing this and say, I'm looking for one, and she's got 3 to 5. How are you doing this? Where are these coming from?
Yeah, so we mentioned a little bit about the relationship piece in the beginning, right? There are some relationships I've been cultivating in the speaking industry for years. And so once you get your foot in the door, they will sometimes invite you back, and you have repeat referral speaking business from these relationships you've cultivated. So many of them are repeat customers. A lot of my customers are Hennepin County through the government here in Minnesota. But I have lots of repeat customers as well. But I also am always looking for new communities to share my message with. So if you're listening to this and you have a community and you're like, Jenn, my people want to hear more about that, I would love to have a conversation with you, because that is how I stay visible. That's how most people find me. That's how most people hear about me. So I appreciate any opportunity to share my message.
We'll tell people how they can find you and connect with you so that they can have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is my favorite place to hang out. I'm sorry, Facebook. I'm sorry, Instagram. It's all about LinkedIn for me. So definitely check me out. I'm streaming through LinkedIn, so you can connect with me directly there, or you can just see the links below this live stream here. And then go to my website if you want to check out my speaking page. If you want to bring me into your group, I present for membership groups as well. Waitlistchronicles.com. And then if you just want to say hi and follow me, connect with me, I would love to have you download the free signature speech template so you can get started finding your stage. It starts with a consistent signature speech. I'd love to help you with the creation of that and delivering it more powerfully. So make sure to download that free resource. And by the way, you get free invitations to my next event. I host master classes on how to find your stage. So if you're like, Jenn, I got a speech that's covered. Cool. Do you know how to find your next stage? Well, come join me at my next master class. I'm happy to show you the high level process of it.
That sounds like a masterclass I myself need to show up at. So
You're
thank
welcome.
you. This has been great, Jenn. And guys, share this. If you know speakers, if you know people who present, who want to present, share this out so that they can also hear Jenn, hear the amazing tips that she shared today, have a conversation with your people with you're speaking to, right? Also, make sure that you are rehearsing multiple times and so many other things. And so, this has been so good. Thank you. I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Thank you, Kanisha.